SpaceX has begun building a launch pad for its Starship rockets in Florida. Elon Musk announced, as the company looks to add another location to launch the mammoth rocket that is in development. The company had previously started some work on a Starship-specific launch pad on the grounds of Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, which SpaceX leases from the agency to launch its Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets. Since builders have poured concrete for the foundation of the Starship pad in late 2019, the location has largely remained dormant. Musk said in a tweet that the construction of Starship's orbital launch pad and Cape had begun. Starship is developing to launch cargo and people on missions to the Moon and Mars. Less than 2 weeks after Elon Musk revealed that SpaceX has restarted construction of a Starship launch site at Kennedy Space Center's existing LC-39A pad, NASA has revealed the company's plans for an entirely different Starship launch site, just a few miles to the north. Known as Launch Complex 49, LC-49, and located where NASA once considered building LC-39C, a third Saturn-class pad to match 39A and 39B. NASA now says that SpaceX aims to develop the site into a dedicated Starship launch pad. The plot of land NASA deemed LC-49, as recently as 2017, sits about 1 mile (1.6 kilometers) northwest of NASA's LC-39B Space Launch System (SLS) pad, and 3 miles (5 kilometers) northwest of LC-39A, which SpaceX has leased since 2014 and launched out of since 2017. Unlike 39A though, SpaceX has a huge amount of work and major environmental reviews ahead of it to turn LC-49 into a site capable of launching a rocket more than twice as powerful as Saturn V. NASA, in a statement to CNBC, confirmed that SpaceX is within the rights of their lease agreement to make launch infrastructure improvements within the boundaries of the pad. The agency also confirmed that NASA is not providing funding for the Starship launch pad, and deferred to SpaceX on the project's scope, cost, and timeline. The space agency performed an environmental assessment of the plan in 2019, and gave SpaceX permission to begin work with the LC-39A site, but the agency said that approval is only to build at this time, with authorization for launches and landings requiring a separate approval process. Tom Engler, Director of Planning and Development at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, told CNBC that he thinks the SpaceX plan is really exciting. Before the company leased the complex, it was previously used to launch Saturn V rockets for Apollo missions, as well as space shuttle missions. Engler said that if you look at the history of the launch pad, this is probably right in line with how it was meant to be used. He added that to them, it's kind of a reaffirmation of the thought process of why that pad was built to begin with. Currently, LC-49 amounts to a mostly arbitrary dotted line on a map, situated a few thousand feet south of the lovingly named Mosquito Lagoon Aquatic Preserve and Canaveral Seashore National Park. The site encompasses a variety of wild wetlands and is fully underdeveloped. While substantially wetter, the land SpaceX hopes to develop is quite similar to the site that hosts Starbase's Starship launch facilities in Boca Chica, Texas. Before SpaceX's arrival, the area was empty coastal mudflats. To turn such a fragile and unstable area into an orbital launch site, SpaceX trucked in thousands of tons of soil, which then sat in a pile for 3 years, surcharging or compressing the ground beneath it. Ironically, while SpaceX did build a relatively small suborbital launch site where it is surcharged, the company has built the site's first orbital Starship launch pad a bit to the east, where no such preparations were made. That bodes well for the speed with which SpaceX could potentially build LC-49 from nothing, though it will likely be significantly more of a challenge. Because NASA's proposed LC-49 site is effectively swamp and marshland, SpaceX will have to create the ground any planned Starship launch site will stand on. It's possible that soil surcharging will be required, and potentially on an even larger scale than what SpaceX did in Boca Chica. However, given that SpaceX ultimately didn't even use that surcharged land to construct the orbital half of the pad, SpaceX may be able to make do with less time-consuming construction methods. If SpaceX does more or less replicate an orbital launch site similar to Starbase's, the pad could be ready to launch just 12 to 18 months later. NASA and SpaceX will have to complete environmental reviews along the way, but given planning work that NASA's already done over the decades, it's possible that SpaceX will be able to start building LC-49 well before that process, which could take 1 or several years, is complete. No less intriguing is NASA's implication that SpaceX is simultaneously preparing to expand a facility it leases elsewhere at Kennedy Space Center, currently used to process and store Falcon boosters, fairings, and upper stages. SpaceX has been clearing a lot beside that hangar that's about the same size as the entirety of Starbase's South Texas Starship factory. The obvious implication, SpaceX intends to both build and launch Starships out of multiple Florida launch pads. When SpaceX began Starship development in earnest 2 years ago, the company started building rocket prototypes, both nearby the NASA complex and at its private facility in Boca Chica, Texas. The company later pivoted to focus on the work at the Boca Chica site, which is nicknamed Starbase, and has since conducted Starship test flights and more from the Texas location. Last month, Musk said that SpaceX will hopefully launch the first Starship prototype to orbit in January or February from Texas, the company's next major step in developing the rocket. That test is pending regulatory approval, as SpaceX needs a launch license from the Federal Aviation Administration for the mission, with the federal agency expecting to complete a key environmental assessment by the end of this year. Just a few miles south, Elon Musk says that SpaceX has restarted work on a separate Starship launchpad, situated on Pad 39A grounds, after halting construction last year to focus on South Texas. SpaceX chose to entirely scrap the unfinished launch mount it had built, clearing the site for the construction of a new and improved version of Starbase's orbital launch site. Altogether, SpaceX is now simultaneously constructing 2 orbital Starship launch pads, one at Starbase and one at 39A, and planning for the construction of 2 or 3 more, a second at Starbase and at least 1 or 2 at LC-49. Musk's recent tweets mark the renewal of work on the Florida launch site for the Mammoth rocket, as he pushes SpaceX to perform as many as a dozen Starship test flights next year. His construction announcement also comes as SpaceX works to resolve a crisis with the production of the Raptor engines that power Starship rockets, Musk disclosed in an email to employees the day after Thanksgiving. Musk's email described a dire situation, warning of a genuine risk of bankruptcy for SpaceX if the company is not flying Starship rockets regularly by the end of 2022. In a brief update earlier this week, Musk tweeted that issues with the Raptor engines are getting fixed, but did not provide more details on the problem or solution. Back to the moon. Early last year, NASA picked SpaceX's first multi-billion-dollar human landing systems contract, with the hopes of having Starship carry the first astronauts to the lunar surface since 1972. The first orbital test launch of the spacecraft won't be taking place at the Kennedy Space Center, though. According to Musk, SpaceX will be attempting Starship's maiden voyage into orbit from its Starbase testing facilities in Boca Chica, Texas, sometime early next year. There's a lot of risks associated with this first launch, so I would not say that it is likely to be a success, but I think we will make a lot of progress, Musk said during a virtual meeting of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine last month. Musk also revealed that he's aiming to do up a dozen test flights next year alone, with commercial service kicking off in 2023 to launch real payloads. It's unclear, however, where each of these tests will be conducted from. All told, SpaceX is inching closer to turning its Starship into a reality, though it has plenty of hurdles left to overcome, including the testing of its massive Super Heavy booster, not to mention an environmental review by the Federal Aviation Administration. And that's without getting into the dire financial straits the company may be facing. According to a leaked email Musk sent to employees recently, SpaceX is facing a genuine risk of bankruptcy, as Musk warns that all hands must be on deck to tackle any issue. Now that you've watched the video, let us know what you think by leaving a comment in the section below. Thanks!